Emily Carson adjusted the strap of her navy duffel bag as she stepped out of the rental car. The mountain air of evergreens stung her cheeks, and for the first time in months, she felt the tension of leaving the familiar behind. Her daughter, Maya, sat quietly in the backseat, bouncing slightly in her booster seat, a mix of excitement and nerves written all over her 7-year-old face. Emily had promised Maya that Christmas would be special this year, despite the history that hung heavy over the Carson family. Driving up the snow-dusted driveway, Emily noticed the perfect symmetry of her sister Heather's home. The wreath on the door, the carefully trimmed hedges, the soft glow of holiday lights, they all screamed control and facade. Heather had always been the master of appearances, the kind of person who could make everyone believe she had it all together, while quietly undermining everyone around her. Emily, trained by the Navy to read people quickly, felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She knew what this visit could bring. Maya scrambled out of the car, her little boots crunching in the snow. "Mom, it smells like cookies already," she said, her voice bright, trying to push away the tension Emily carried. Emily smiled faintly and followed her up the steps, bracing herself for the usual choreography of politeness and pretension that awaited inside. She reminded herself to breathe. This wasn't a mission at sea, but it required the same kind of discipline. Stay calm, observe, plan, execute. The front door opened before they reached it. Heather appeared, smiling in that perfectly curated way, blonde hair curled just so, sweater pressed, and lipstick immaculate. "Emily, Maya. So good to see you," she said, her voice syrupy but with an edge that was unmistakable. Emily's eyes flicked to Heather's husband, who gave a polite nod, and then back to her sister. The air was immediately charged. Heather had always known how to make Emily feel like an intruder in her own family. Inside, the house was a flurry of orchestrated warmth. Cousins ran through the foyer, adults clustered around the kitchen island, glasses in hand, all laughing too loud. Emily noted the patterns quickly. Who was trying to catch her eye? Who avoided her? Who whispered behind cupped hands? Everyone played their part, except Emily and Maya. They were observers in this carefully constructed scene. The room smelled of honey-glazed ham and pine, the kind of scent that should have been comforting but instead felt like a warning siren. Emily crouched down to adjust Maya's coat. "Stay close, okay?" she whispered. Maya nodded, gripping her mother's hand a little tighter. Emily felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. She had spent years in the Navy learning to handle chaos, to make split-second decisions, and to maintain calm under pressure. None of it compared to the stakes here. Her daughter's sense of belonging, her dignity, her childhood happiness, everything was on the line, and Heather had a track record of turning Christmas into a performance that left Emily feeling invisible and inadequate. They moved into the great room where the family gathered, the tree enormous, ornaments glinting, lights twinkling. Heather's kids were already seated, perfectly behaved, faces full of expectation. Heather herself was in the center, the conductor of this holiday symphony, and Emily could see the way she relished the attention, her smile sharp, precise, practiced. Emily's brother, Greg, lingered to the side, shoulders tense, and their youngest cousin sat fidgeting, whispering to a friend. The tension was palpable, invisible but heavy. Emily glanced at Maya, who was holding a small drawing of the family she had made at school. She had been proud of it, unaware of the subtleties of adult cruelty that often came wrapped in sugar-coated words. Emily felt a pang of protectiveness that reminded her why she stayed in the Navy. Discipline, training, strategy, it was all for this, to shield her daughter from the manipulations she had endured. Heather's voice rose as she called for everyone to gather for gifts. Emily noted the way her sister moved, pulling presents from a large black bag with theatrics, naming each child, soaking in their cheers. And then it happened. Emily's eyes went cold as Heather's gaze landed on Maya. "Only good kids get presents. Your fatherless child can step aside," Heather said, and the words landed like a slap in the middle of the room. Maya froze, lips pressed together to hold back tears. Emily felt the surge of fury and heartbreak, but she didn't move. She crouched beside her daughter and said quietly, "It's okay, sweetheart, let's go." Standing up, she met Heather's eyes and calmly said, "All right then. Goodbye." No yelling, no pleading, just measured control. And for the first time in years, the air shifted. People whispered, turned their heads, and yet no one intervened. That was when Emily realized the real power in this moment: control, poise, and timing. A soft laugh escaped from Maya, shaky but defiant, and Emily felt the corner of her mouth twitch in what might have been a smile. She whispered to her daughter, "You did nothing wrong, remember that." And as she walked them out into the crisp mountain air, Emily's mind started ticking, reviewing options, thinking several steps ahead. There were legal angles, financial leverage, and a carefully constructed response to ensure Heather's long-standing manipulations would have consequences. The seeds of family revenge stories were being planted, and Emily had her strategy ready. Snow crunched under their boots as they reached the car, the weight of the household's judgment behind them. Emily closed the door, started the engine, and allowed herself one small breath of relief. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in years, she felt the kind of focus only a Navy officer could bring to a family battle. Maya looked up at her and whispered something small about the cookies she had wanted, and Emily simply nodded. There was planning to be done, evidence to gather, and subtle moves to execute. The wheels in her mind were already turning as the car headed down the mountain road. Emily tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the car curved around the snow-covered bend. The lights of Heather's house grew dimmer in the rearview mirror, almost taunting. Maya hummed quietly in the backseat, her little hands folded in her lap. Emily reached back and gently touched Maya's shoulder. "Remember, you are strong," Emily said, her voice firm but gentle. Maya nodded, and Emily felt the familiar edge of control settle over her, the same discipline she carried from years in the Navy. They pulled into the driveway of their small apartment, the familiar hum of city traffic in the distance. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and jumped out, her small boots clumping on the pavement. Emily followed, carrying the bag with their coats and backpacks, but her mind wasn't on the cold or the snow. It was on Heather. On the words. On the way, her sister had tried to humiliate Maya in front of everyone. Emily felt a surge of calm determination, the kind that only years of Navy discipline could produce. No yelling, no tears, just observation, planning, and execution. Inside, Emily set Maya's backpack down and watched her daughter carefully unpack a small drawing she had made at school. The innocence of it, crooked little smiles, uneven lines, made Emily's chest tighten. Heather had tried to use shame as a weapon, but Emily would turn the tables. She thought back to her own years in the Navy, the precision, the tactics, the importance of staying composed while gathering intelligence. This was no different. The enemy had been identified, the strategy needed to be developed. Emily pulled out her laptop and began making lists, categorizing everything from Heather's words, her movements, and the reactions of the family members, to possible legal angles and financial leverage. Every casual insult, every dismissive gesture, every "only good kids" comment became data, fuel for a response that would be measured, methodical, and unstoppable. Emily smiled faintly, almost amused at how predictable Heather's patterns were. The woman thrived on control, but she underestimated one Navy officer with both skill and heart. Maya wandered over, curious about her mother's intensity. "Mom, are we going to fix it?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Emily crouched to her level, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth, and no one ever gets to hurt you again." Maya's eyes lit up, and Emily felt the familiar surge of pride. She had trained to protect lives in hostile environments, and now, she was doing it in the most personal, intimate mission possible: defending her child. The first step was documentation. Emily grabbed her phone and started recording observations discreetly. Heather had relied on secrecy and the obedience of others to maintain her control, but Emily would create a record that was undeniable. Every whisper, every smirk, every attempt to spin reality would be caught. She began drafting emails and making notes, contacting trusted allies for advice. Monica, a friend who specialized in legal matters and had always been a quiet source of guidance, would be the first person she brought into the plan. Emily sipped her coffee, eyes narrowing as she reviewed the data. She could feel Heather's patterns in her head, the way she nudged family members to align with her narrative, the subtle corrections when someone praised Emily or Maya. But Emily was calculating too. She considered financial leverage, the control Heather had tried to maintain over property and shared family projects. Each step Heather had taken, each manipulation, became a potential piece of evidence. Emily allowed herself a quiet chuckle. Heather had built an empire on appearances, and it was going to crumble under the weight of documentation, evidence, and strategy. Maya returned with her drawing in hand, eyes shining. "Mom, maybe I can show my teacher what happened. Then they'll know I'm brave," she said. Emily's lips twitched in a small, approving smile. "We'll consider that," she replied. "Right now, we focus on building our plan." Emily was already mapping out the steps: gather evidence, ensure legal protection, and document everything in a way that couldn't be dismissed. Heather's smugness and control would be challenged, methodically, like a well-executed mission plan. Hours passed as Emily typed, made calls, and reviewed every detail. Maya sat quietly, coloring or drawing, occasionally glancing up to see her mother focused and composed. Emily explained things in small, digestible pieces, teaching her daughter the value of standing up to manipulation, of planning, of using intelligence instead of emotion as a weapon. It was subtle education, but it planted seeds of awareness and resilience in Maya, the kind that would last far beyond this family confrontation. By evening, Emily had her plan outlined. Legal research, evidence collection, and subtle financial steps were all aligned. She leaned back in her chair, feeling the familiar calm of preparation, the kind of calm only experience and confidence bring. Heather had underestimated them both, assuming they would respond with panic or tears. Emily would respond with precision and strategy. Maya had been protected, and the stage was set for the next moves. Emily called Monica, brief and direct. "We need to discuss some family matters. There are legal angles, and I need advice. Can you come by?" Monica's response was immediate, understanding, and supportive. Emily hung up, feeling a surge of reassurance. She glanced at Maya, who was now quietly eating a snack, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was the first real move in reclaiming control, and it felt deliberate and empowering. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, dusting the city in white. Inside, Emily felt the strategy settling into place. No one had to know yet, but the momentum had begun. Every observation, every note, every recorded comment became a tool in the arsenal she was building. Heather had made a critical mistake. She had assumed Emily would react emotionally, without calculation. She had underestimated a Navy-trained mother, with both skill and heart. Emily looked over at Maya one last time before bedtime, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Sleep well. Tomorrow, we start moving," she said softly. Maya nodded, already drifting into dreams. Emily sat back, hands folded, and allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. She was calm, prepared, and ready to execute a plan that Heather had no idea was already in motion. The tension remained, the stakes were high, but Emily's focus had never been sharper. Every step was deliberate, every decision precise, and the momentum of family revenge was already building. Emily leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Maya carefully stack her colored pencils in order. The rhythmic sound of the pencils sliding against each other seemed almost calming, but Emily's mind was racing. Every word Heather had spoken earlier, every dismissive glance, every smirk, had layers. There was more to her sister's behavior than mere jealousy or cruelty. Emily had learned in the Navy that to win, you first had to understand your opponent. Heather's control over the family had been cultivated over decades, and Emily needed to uncover every hidden tactic. She started with observation notes, jotting down every interaction from the morning, cross-referencing it with past family events she remembered. Heather's ability to manipulate family gatherings, to make everyone dance to her tune, wasn't accidental. There were patterns, subtle but deliberate. Every compliment Emily had received over the years had been undercut by a whisper from Heather to someone else. Every time Maya had been excluded, it was strategic, not spontaneous. Emily felt the familiar clarity of a trained strategist. data collection, pattern recognition, and the anticipation of the next moves. Emily dialed her brother Greg, her voice low, precise. "We need to talk about Heather's behavior, the way she's manipulated everyone, and the patterns with Maya," she said. Greg hesitated, then sighed. "I've noticed, yes. But everyone's too afraid to call her out." Emily nodded internally. Fear and silence were Heather's greatest tools. "We're not afraid," Emily replied. "We're going to document it. We'll protect Maya, and then everything else will follow." Greg's relief was palpable, even over the phone. Emily hung up with a sense of satisfaction. Allies were necessary, and Greg was one who could be relied upon without question. Next, Emily turned her attention to tangible evidence. Family emails, social media posts, old photographs, anything that could demonstrate Heather's manipulation or favoritism. She had kept a file over the years of incidents, careful to preserve dates, names, and contexts. Now, every entry became critical. Emily cross-checked them meticulously, confirming accuracy and relevance. Every subtle act Heather had committed against Maya and herself could be turned into undeniable proof. The Navy had trained her to approach intelligence methodically, and she was applying the same principles here. Maya wandered over, curious about her mother's intensity. "Mom, are we really going to show everyone the truth?" she asked, voice tentative. Emily crouched down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Yes, Maya, but we do it carefully, smart, strategic, like a mission. No one can hurt you again." Maya's small smile was reassuring, and Emily felt a surge of pride. This was not just about revenge, it was about reclaiming their dignity, asserting boundaries, and taking control. Emily opened her laptop, compiling the growing collection of emails, photos, and notes. She labeled each piece meticulously, aware that if Heather tried to manipulate the narrative later, Emily would have evidence to counter every claim. There were subtle entries showing Heather instructing other family members to undermine Emily or Maya, instructions hidden in casual messages, but clear when viewed in sequence. Emily's strategy was forming. First, document, then expose, then apply measured pressure. She paused, taking a deep breath. The complexity of Heather's control was impressive in its design, but vulnerable in its rigidity. Everyone who followed Heather's lead did so out of fear or habit, not conviction. That meant the system could be disrupted. Emily began drafting a timeline of Heather's manipulations, noting key events where Heather had orchestrated exclusion, humiliation, or favoritism. Each incident was another piece of the puzzle, and Emily's plan to dismantle it was growing sharper by the hour. Emily reviewed past holiday gatherings, recalling moments when Heather's words had subtly shifted the room's energy. There had been coded compliments, minor criticisms, casual suggestions that Emily or Maya was overstepping or undeserving. Heather had maintained control by making others complicit, by enforcing silence and encouraging obedience. Emily noted each example carefully, aware that the family's fear had been a key component in Heather's strategy. Her training in leadership and command gave her the patience and clarity to dissect it without emotion clouding judgment. Next, Emily focused on the most immediate threat, Heather's public mockery of Maya. She knew that if Heather's cruelty went unchecked, it would embed itself in Maya's sense of self. Emily began planning ways to shield her daughter, while subtly reversing Heather's influence. She thought about social proof, documentation, and allies who could quietly support them. Each tactical decision was grounded in logic, precision, and timing, her Navy experience guiding every move. The late afternoon light fell across the living room, as Emily created a comprehensive map of influence. Heather at the center, with branches representing family members who followed her lead, those who could be convinced, and those who were neutral. Emily smiled faintly. The diagram was revealing. Heather's empire of control was strong but fragile. If the right evidence was presented, and the right voices supported it, the structure could be dismantled efficiently, without unnecessary confrontation. Maya returned to her coloring, the faint smile still on her face. Emily watched her daughter and felt a surge of resolve. Protecting Maya was priority one. Establishing boundaries, reclaiming family dynamics, and neutralizing Heather's manipulations would follow. Every calculated move, every piece of evidence gathered, and every subtle influence applied would reinforce the foundation they were building. Emily knew Heather's arrogance was her weakness. She had underestimated a mother with Navy discipline and a clear objective: ensure her daughter was safe, respected, and never humiliated again. Emily leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. The early steps of the plan were complete: observation, documentation, ally support, and strategy formation. Heather's carefully constructed control was now visible, measurable, and vulnerable. Emily's calm had become a weapon, her foresight an advantage. And as she glanced at Maya, busy with her crayons, Emily felt the focus settle firmly in her chest, the clarity that comes when preparation meets opportunity. The evening settled around them, quiet except for the low hum of the city outside. Emily's mind continued to race, mapping out every move, anticipating Heather's reactions, and considering the most efficient way to reclaim agency. The tension was high, but Emily felt composed, precise, and ready. The foundations of their strategy were secure, and the momentum was building steadily. Emily closed her laptop and leaned back, letting the low hum of the heater fill the silence. Maya had wandered to the window, peering out at the snow settling over the quiet street. Emily's focus sharpened. She knew that to dismantle Heather's grip, she couldn't act alone. Allies were necessary, people who understood the dynamics, who could validate the truth and provide leverage. Her first call was to Greg, her brother, whose subtle resistance to Heather had always been quiet but consistent. "Greg," Emily began, her voice steady, "I need you on my side. Everything you've noticed, everything Heather's done, I need it documented. Dates, specifics, anything. We're creating a record that can't be ignored." Greg paused, taking a deep breath, then said, "I've seen it, Emily. I just didn't know how to step forward. I'll do it." Emily felt a small surge of satisfaction. Allies were essential, and Greg was reliable, honest, and aware of the subtleties Heather used to manipulate everyone. Next, Emily reached out to Monica, her legal contact who had experience with family law and disputes. "Monica, I need advice. This isn't about lawsuits yet, but we're documenting patterns of manipulation, exclusion, and emotional cruelty. I want to understand our options and protect Maya effectively." Monica's response was calm but serious. "Document everything. Timing and evidence matter more than emotion. Keep her safe first, then think strategy." Emily nodded, even though Monica couldn't see her. That was exactly the plan. Observation, documentation, allies, strategy, execution. While organizing evidence, Emily noticed the deeper patterns Heather had established over the years. Birthday parties, holidays, casual comments, they all built a subtle hierarchy of control. Heather's power didn't come from strength. It came from influence, fear, and narrative control. Emily's Navy training helped her see each action, each word, as data. She cataloged interactions, subtle gestures, emails, even photos that had previously seemed inconsequential. Each now became a piece in a larger mosaic of influence, and Emily felt the satisfaction of understanding the battlefield. Maya, curious, asked, "Mom, will they know we're serious?" Emily crouched to her level, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Yes, Maya. We're careful, precise. We're going to show the truth, but we do it wisely. You'll be safe, always." Maya nodded, trusting the confidence in her mother's voice. Emily smiled faintly. Trust was a weapon in itself, one that Heather could never manipulate if used correctly. Emily turned her attention back to planning the next steps. Social influence mattered. She needed subtle validation from other family members. Her eyes scanned the collected messages from Heather's past manipulations, noting those who had been complicit but might now be swayed with evidence. Patterns emerged. Some relatives had been too afraid to intervene, others unaware of the full context. With precise timing, Emily could quietly shift allegiances, ensuring that when Heather's facade started to crack, support would be visible, undeniable. She organized the evidence into categories: direct manipulation, emotional exclusion, and targeted humiliation. Every word Heather had spoken about Maya being fatherless or unworthy became critical documentation. Emily's strategy was to neutralize Heather's power through exposure, credibility, and allies without creating chaos that could backfire. The meticulous preparation mirrored her military training: mission planning, risk assessment, operational control. Later, Emily prepared a small briefing for Greg and Monica. It was concise, clear, and actionable. Every step was deliberate. Document, protect, build alliances, expose, and maintain control. Heather's influence depended on secrecy and compliance. By breaking one and then the other, Emily could shift the balance of power. Maya sat nearby, quietly drawing, the innocence in her demeanor, a constant reminder of why Emily had committed herself so fully to this plan. As night fell, Emily reviewed Heather's prior patterns at holiday gatherings. Subtle comments, staged group photos, whispered instructions to others, all pointed to an ongoing strategy of manipulation and control. Emily recognized the signs because her experience had trained her to notice inconsistencies and underlying motives. Every family dynamic could be dissected and anticipated. She began mapping a timeline, plotting actions, expected responses, and contingency plans. Heather thrived on surprise and panic. Emily would remove both from the equation. Greg arrived that evening, briefcase in hand, filled with past emails, photos, and recorded anecdotes he had quietly preserved. Emily, I've gathered everything I could. Dates, conversations, incidents documented, like you asked. Emily felt a surge of gratitude. The mission was no longer just her own. Allies were essential, and Greg's participation meant they had both insider knowledge and credibility. They worked together, cross-referencing details, noting patterns, and preparing to present evidence in a coherent, undeniable way. Emily explained each step to Greg. Timing is crucial. We don't react emotionally. We protect Maya first, then move strategically. Heather underestimates us. She expects chaos. We'll give her control, and then quietly take it away. Greg nodded, understanding the precision required. The evening wound down, but Emily remained vigilant, reviewing every message, every pattern, every recorded instance of Heather's manipulations. Maya, tired, finally curled up with her blanket, eyes heavy with sleep. Emily felt a quiet satisfaction. The groundwork had been laid, allies were in place, and strategy was moving forward. Heather had no idea that her carefully constructed control was being systematically analyzed and prepared for disruption. Emily's calm, military-trained mind allowed her to see several steps ahead, predicting Heather's reactions and planning countermeasures with precision. Emily sat back in the quiet apartment, letting her mind run through the operational plan. Every detail mattered, every ally was strategically positioned, and every piece of evidence was a tool. Heather's empire of influence was formidable, but it relied on secrecy, fear, and obedience. Emily's approach, calm, methodical, precise, was the perfect counter. Maya was safe, allies were ready, and the first moves of family revenge were firmly in motion. The night stretched on, snow continuing to fall lightly outside, as Emily's mind ran scenarios and contingencies. Emily's fingers hovered over the keyboard, the soft hum of her laptop filling the quiet apartment. Every piece of evidence she had collected, every note from Greg, every email, every subtle manipulation by Heather, was catalogued and ready for deployment. She knew that precision mattered more than emotion. Heather thrived on chaos, on panic, on emotional reactions. Emily would give her none of that. Calm, methodical, deliberate action that was her weapon, honed from years in the Navy. Maya sat nearby, drawing quietly, unaware of the strategy unfolding around her. Emily watched her daughter, feeling the surge of protective instinct combined with the clarity of a commander planning a mission. "We're starting now," Emily said softly, almost to herself. She drafted a carefully worded email to Monica, outlining the situation, providing evidence, and requesting legal guidance for the first formal steps. Every word was precise, measured, designed to create clarity without overreaction. After hitting send, Emily allowed herself a small smile. The first move was in motion. Heather would begin to notice the subtle shift, the first ripple of change in the narrative she had controlled for so long. Emily's plan was to expose manipulation through documentation, witness corroboration, and controlled disclosure. Heather's power relied on secrecy. Once that secrecy was pierced, the illusion of control would begin to crumble. Emily reviewed the family dynamics in her head. Heather had built a hierarchy based on fear, obedience, and selective information. Certain cousins and aunts had been subtly directed to follow her lead, to reinforce her narrative at gatherings. Emily's strategy was to gently disrupt this pattern by introducing credible information through trusted channels, allowing allies like Greg to validate the truth while she maintained calm control. Timing would be critical. She drafted notes for Greg, outlining specific events, key phrases Heather had used to manipulate, and moments when Maya had been publicly humiliated. "We present facts," Emily reminded him, "not emotions. Let the evidence speak." Greg nodded, understanding the importance of restraint. Their shared understanding of strategy created a quiet strength, a coordinated effort that Heather could not anticipate. Later, Emily reviewed social dynamics, identifying family members who had influence but were neutral or swayed by fear. These were potential allies in subtly shifting perception. If Heather's behavior could be confirmed and quietly documented, the truth would begin to penetrate the carefully constructed walls of her influence. Emily felt a quiet satisfaction. The operation was methodical, deliberate, and precise, just like a military maneuver. Maya, curious, peeked over Emily's shoulder. "Mom, what's all that for?" she asked innocently. Emily crouched down and smiled. "We're making sure no one ever gets to hurt you like that again. It's like making a shield, one piece at a time." Maya nodded, eyes wide but trusting. Emily's calm confidence reassured her daughter. Even as the weight of the situation remained heavy, Emily continued mapping out the sequence of actions. Heather would likely react immediately if she sensed scrutiny, so each move had to appear casual, routine, and unthreatening. The documentation of past manipulations, combined with corroboration from Greg, created a quiet but powerful foundation. Emily's Navy-honed ability to anticipate reactions, plan contingencies, and act decisively gave her a distinct advantage. By evening, Emily had contacted Monica, discussed next steps, and received guidance on legal protocols, documentation, and boundaries. The emphasis was on protecting Maya while neutralizing Heather's influence in the family. Emily felt a surge of clarity. Control had shifted subtly but significantly. The first ripple of change had been created. Heather's attempts at dominance would begin to falter under the weight of strategic preparation. Emily paused to watch Maya quietly finish a drawing, her small face calm and focused. "Good job, Maya," Emily said softly. "See? You're strong, and we're making sure everyone sees that too." Maya smiled, unaware of the subtle military-level strategy unfolding around her. Emily felt a rare moment of pride and calm, the satisfaction of executing a plan with precision while protecting what mattered most. She then reviewed all collected data again, cross-checking for completeness, gaps, and potential weaknesses. Heather's manipulations were now clearly documented. Every dismissive comment, every subtle act of exclusion, every orchestrated humiliation. Emily felt the familiar thrill of anticipation, not revenge, born of anger, but calculated justice, precise and undeniable. Emily knew that the next moves would involve controlled exposure, ally validation, and timing. The patterns she had identified meant Heather relied on secrecy, fear, and obedience. By removing those elements and introducing credible evidence, Emily could subtly shift influence without unnecessary confrontation. Every action was deliberate, every decision precise, every outcome considered. As the night deepened, Emily reflected on the plan's momentum. Allies were in place, evidence was organized, and strategy was clear. Heather's dominance was about to be challenged not with yelling or chaos, but with precision, documentation, and quiet authority. Maya slept nearby, her trust in her mother absolute, providing Emily with the clarity and calm focus needed to execute the next stage flawlessly. Emily leaned back, stretching her shoulders, letting the satisfaction of preparation settle. The operation was underway. Heather would sense subtle shifts, the first cracks in her carefully constructed empire. Emily's combination of strategic thinking, Navy discipline, and maternal instinct ensured that when the moment came, the exposure would be undeniable, controlled, and effective. Every calculated step reinforced her position, secured Maya's protection, and quietly set the stage for the family's next unraveling. Emily stared at the spreadsheet on her laptop, each column a timeline of Heather's manipulations, every comment and action meticulously catalogued. The room was quiet, except for Maya's soft breathing from her nap nearby. Emily's mind raced through the patterns she had observed, every glance, every whispered instruction, every carefully constructed family dynamic. Heather had built a small empire, subtle and precise, using fear and expectation as tools. Emily's task was simple in principle, but complex in execution. Dismantle it without giving Heather any obvious advantage. Her first move was to activate her network of allies. Greg had already collected his observations and emails, and Emily planned to connect with two other cousins who had historically been neutral but aware of Heather's control. She drafted carefully worded messages, neutral in tone, but structured to encourage collaboration. Precision mattered. She couldn't risk an emotional reaction tipping Heather off. Every sentence was a calculated nudge toward validation of the truth. Emily's thoughts returned to Maya. Her daughter had been silent, processing Heather's cruelty internally. Emily knew that psychological safety was as important as strategic planning. She crouched down, brushing Maya's hair from her face. "We're going to make sure no one can hurt you like that again," she said softly. Maya nodded, small but determined. Emily felt the familiar sense of calm focus wash over her, a balance of maternal instinct and tactical discipline that had been honed in her Navy service. Next, Emily reviewed the family gathering footage she had managed to obtain. Heather's words, subtle corrections, and attempts to influence others were now clear in the recording. Emily labeled each segment, noting the manipulation, the context, and the potential witness reactions. The goal wasn't to humiliate Heather publicly immediately. It was to create undeniable evidence that could be presented logically and systematically. Heather's entire strategy relied on secrecy and control, and exposing that quietly but thoroughly would tip the balance in Emily's favor. Greg arrived in the late afternoon, a folder full of corroborating messages and personal notes from family members who had seen Heather's subtle influence but had never spoken out. Emily went through the evidence with him, confirming dates and sequences, ensuring nothing was missing. "This is exactly what we need," Emily said, calm but determined. "Timing, clarity, and documentation are our leverage. Heather's power is her narrative control. We take that away, and she's exposed." Greg nodded, understanding the weight of precision. Emily then drafted a plan for controlled exposure. First, she would present evidence to those in the family who had influence but were neutral or quiet. Next, she would document their reactions. Finally, she would ensure Maya's safety remained intact throughout. Each step was methodical, with contingencies in place for any unexpected behavior. Emily's Navy training had taught her to anticipate reactions and prepare countermeasures. She applied the same methodology here. Maya stirred from her nap and climbed onto Emily's lap, curious about her mother's focused intensity. "Mom, are we really going to show them?" she asked softly. Emily hugged her close. "Yes, honey, but we're smart about it. We're not being mean. We're making sure the truth is clear." Maya leaned against her, comforted by the calm and authority in her voice. Emily felt a surge of protective satisfaction. Every decision she made now was to ensure her daughter would never be belittled again and that their family dynamic would shift toward truth rather than fear. By evening, Emily had set the stage for the first controlled confrontation. Heather had unknowingly created vulnerabilities in her own structure, her reliance on secrecy, the compliance of others, and her carefully crafted narrative. Emily's plan exploited these gaps strategically, without appearing reactive. Allies would validate the facts, the evidence was unassailable, and Maya's well-being was fully protected. Emily reviewed her notes one last time, checking timelines, reactions, and contingencies. The critical piece was ensuring that Heather couldn't predict the moves. Each step had to be subtle, precise, and deliberate. If Heather reacted prematurely, the impact would be diminished. Emily's calm, measured approach mirrored a tactical operation in the field. Precision and patience were key. Her experience in the Navy had prepared her for such meticulous planning under pressure. Finally, Emily allowed herself a brief pause, glancing at Maya, who was quietly arranging her colored pencils. "You're doing amazing, Maya," Emily whispered. Her daughter smiled faintly, unaware of the strategic network of plans forming around her safety and future. Emily returned the smile, then turned back to the laptop, double-checking every piece of evidence. The operation was in motion, subtle but potent. Heather's manipulations were about to face scrutiny in a way that was precise, undeniable, and irreversible. The snow outside thickened, falling silently over the quiet street. Inside, Emily's mind was clear. Every element of the strategy accounted for, every ally prepared, and every potential reaction anticipated. Heather's control, built over decades, was now under methodical pressure. Emily's combination of maternal instinct, Navy-honed discipline, and strategic foresight ensured that when exposure occurred, it would be effective, controlled, and decisive. Emily sat in her living room, reviewing her notes one last time. Every detail mattered. The emails, photos, recordings, and witness accounts. The first move wasn't about confrontation, yet it was about setting the stage, showing that Heather's control was no longer invisible. Allies were in position, timelines were clear, and Emily's approach was precise, calculated, and unflinching. Greg arrived shortly after, carrying a folder of notes and observations from relatives who had quietly witnessed Heather's manipulations over the years. "Emily," he said, voice low, "people are tired of the tension, but they've never known how to address it. This might finally give them a chance to speak." Emily nodded. Their strategy was subtle. Let the evidence speak, let allies corroborate, and allow Heather to reveal herself under scrutiny, rather than overtly attacking her. Maya peeked from behind the couch, her eyes curious. "Mom, are they going to see what she did?" Emily crouched to meet her gaze. "Yes, honey, they're going to understand, but we do it carefully, smartly. You're safe, always." Maya's small nod and trusting expression reminded Emily why every move had to be deliberate. This was about protection as much as exposure, precision as much as justice. The first confrontation took place during a small, casual family gathering. Emily had arranged it to look routine: coffee, cookies, a simple check-in with relatives, but strategically, it was the moment Heather's influence would be subtly challenged. Emily arrived early, laptop in hand, notes ready, and Greg following close behind with corroborating documents. She greeted Heather warmly, neutral in tone, careful not to give away her intentions. Heather, sensing nothing, smiled condescendingly. That smile would be the first crack. Emily began the conversation casually, asking about family updates and subtly guiding the discussion toward past gatherings. "Remember last Christmas," she said softly. "There were some moments with Maya that seemed upsetting. I just wanted to clarify things, make sure I understood correctly." Heather's expression tightened for a fraction of a second. Emily pressed subtly, referencing specific incidents in neutral language. "There were some comments about Maya's father, and I think they may have been misinterpreted. Can we review what actually happened?" Heather's composure began to falter, tiny slips of the practiced facade. She laughed nervously, tried to redirect, but Emily maintained her calm, measured tone. "I want to ensure everyone sees things clearly. I've compiled some notes, just to be sure we all have the same understanding." Greg quietly distributed, corroborating notes to a few key relatives, positioning allies to witness the truth unfold. Heather noticed the subtle support, but couldn't anticipate how aligned Emily and Greg were. Subtle revelations began to appear. Heather's small corrections, her attempts to control the narrative, and her dismissive remarks now clashed with clear, documented evidence. Relatives exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into previously unquestioning faces. Emily remained calm, allowing facts and documentation to speak louder than confrontation or emotion. Heather's cracks grew visible, tiny, imperceptible shifts that added up rapidly. Maya, seated nearby, watched the exchange quietly. She didn't understand every nuance, but she sensed her mother's calm confidence. Emily's approach was deliberate: protect Maya, subtly challenge Heather, and validate facts with allies. Every movement and word was calculated, designed to expose Heather's manipulations while keeping her in check, without giving her a clear target for emotional retaliation. Emily highlighted specific incidents with neutral phrasing. In these notes, it's clear that Maya was left out of certain celebrations, and comments were made that could have hurt her. I just want to confirm these were not intentional, correct? Heather faltered, her smile tightening, voice slightly raising defensively. Allies quietly confirmed Emily's observations, nodding subtly. Heather's influence wavered for the first time in years. As the gathering continued, Emily observed micro-reactions from the room. Heather tried to regain control, redirecting conversations, making jokes to dismiss tension. But the evidence had been placed carefully. Witnesses were aligned, and Emily's presence exuded controlled authority. Each attempt Heather made to dominate or redirect failed quietly, leaving cracks in her narrative. Emily noted every subtle shift, already planning next steps to amplify the exposure strategically. After a short pause, Emily turned to another relative who had previously remained silent. You've seen how these dynamics played out. Does this align with your experience? The relative nodded hesitantly, validating the documented events without directly challenging Heather. The room shifted subtly. Heather's influence had always relied on secrecy and unanimous agreement, and the disruption was palpable. By the end of the gathering, the first cracks in Heather's control were undeniable. Allies had validated observations, subtle exposure had begun, and Heather's composure was strained, though she still attempted to maintain her facade. Emily maintained calm, measured engagement, ensuring no backlash could undermine their position. Maya remained safe, and the momentum of strategic exposure continued to build quietly but powerfully. Emily returned home with Maya later that evening, quiet satisfaction settling in. The operation had begun with precision. Heather's influence was no longer invisible, her cracks visible even to those previously complicit through silence. Emily's calm, deliberate actions, combined with evidence and ally validation, had set the stage for deeper exposure. Every carefully calculated step reinforced control, prepared for escalation, and ensured Maya's safety at every moment. The night was silent, snow falling lightly outside, and Emily allowed herself a moment to observe the impact of careful planning, patience, and disciplined execution. Heather's manipulations had been challenged successfully, subtly, and strategically, without unnecessary drama. Emily's mind was already running through next steps, contingencies, and further consolidation of influence. The family dynamic had shifted, and control was slowly tilting toward clarity, truth, and strategic authority. Emily walked into the family room with a quiet confidence, her laptop under her arm, and notes organized in precise order. The subtle hum of the heater was the only sound beyond the faint ticking of the clock. Tonight wasn't about confrontation in the traditional sense, it was about controlled exposure, a careful unveiling of Heather's manipulations so that the truth would speak for itself. Allies were ready, documentation was flawless, and Emily had already anticipated Heather's likely reactions. Every detail mattered, every word was a calculated move. Heather arrived shortly after, her usual calm mask firmly in place. She greeted Emily with a smile, but Emily could see the faint tension in her eyes. Years of controlling the family through subtle manipulation hadn't prepared Heather for a situation where her tactics were documented and visible. Emily sat, opened her laptop, and casually shared an innocuous-looking folder with Greg and a few cousins who had quietly been observing. Each document, email, or note was a piece of Heather's control meticulously recorded. "Just making sure we're all on the same page," Emily said, her voice calm but authoritative. "Sometimes details get lost over the years, and I thought it'd help to have everything laid out clearly." Heather's forced smile faltered slightly. Emily's subtle phrasing, non-accusatory but deliberate, was designed to put Heather on the defensive without appearing aggressive. Allies quietly nodded, validating Emily's approach and providing silent confirmation that the evidence was credible. Emily started with minor, easily verifiable incidents from past gatherings, small exclusions, casual remarks about Maya, and moments where Heather had influenced the reactions of others. Each example was simple, factual, and precise. Heather tried to redirect, making light jokes and casual observations, but Emily maintained her calm authority, steering the focus back to facts. Heather's reliance on control through narrative was already starting to show cracks. Maya, sitting quietly with her coloring book, glanced up at her mother. "Mom, are they really listening?" Emily smiled subtly, placing a hand gently on Maya's shoulder. "Yes, honey, they're seeing the truth now. It's being noticed." Maya nodded, a small sense of reassurance in her eyes. Emily felt a wave of satisfaction. Protecting Maya was priority one. The strategic exposure was the next step. The combination ensured both immediate safety and long-term justice. As Emily presented each documented instance, she observed the reactions. Some relatives shifted in their seats, their expressions a mixture of surprise and acknowledgement. Heather's control relied on unanimity. Her influence was strongest when no one challenged her publicly. By quietly assembling facts and aligning witnesses, Emily had subtly disrupted that structure. Heather's tension grew with every nod, every whispered confirmation, and every acknowledgement of previously unseen manipulations. Emily's Navy training informed every step. She anticipated defensive tactics, minor attempts to divert attention, and subtle gaslighting. Each potential maneuver by Heather had a predetermined counter. Emily remained composed, almost eerily calm, letting Heather reveal herself without overt confrontation. The allies around her subtly reinforced the credibility of the observations, nodding at key points, exchanging brief confirmations, and ensuring that Heather's facade was increasingly isolated. Heather's composure finally slipped when Emily referenced a past holiday incident, documented with dates, emails, and witness accounts. Her hand twitched slightly, and her voice rose defensively. Emily didn't escalate. She simply paused, let the evidence speak, and allowed the room to fill with silent acknowledgement. Heather's attempts to regain control faltered as more relatives whispered quietly, corroborating Emily's accounts. The subtle but undeniable validation eroded Heather's influence in real time. Emily then shifted to the most critical part, Maya's experiences. She presented specific examples of Heather's dismissive and cruel remarks directed at her daughter, supported by witnesses and prior documentation. The impact was immediate. Heather's forced composure began to crack, her eyes darting, searching for a way to regain control, but allies had created a buffer. Emily's measured tone, factual presentation, and strategic positioning ensured that Heather could not redirect without further undermining her credibility. After the conversation, Emily observed Heather's retreat, subtle but undeniable. She attempted minor justifications and minimizations, but the foundation of her influence was weakened. Allies were aligned, evidence had been presented methodically, and the narrative Heather had controlled for decades was now questioned in a controlled, deliberate way. Emily allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Her strategic exposure had worked carefully, without chaos, without emotional overreach, but with undeniable clarity. As the family gathering dispersed, Emily stayed calm, letting the effects of the controlled exposure settle. Heather's influence was weakened, allies were validated, and Maya's safety remained intact. Emily knew the momentum was now in their favor, and the next steps would involve maintaining control and further consolidating truth in the family dynamic. The night was quiet, the snow outside softening the city sounds, and Emily reflected on the effectiveness of strategy, precision, and disciplined action. Every move was deliberate, every reaction anticipated, and every outcome controlled. By the time Emily tucked Maya into bed, she felt the subtle yet tangible shift in the family structure. Heather's cracks were no longer minor. They were visible, undeniable, and strategically exploitable. Emily's calm, methodical approach, informed by her Navy training and maternal instinct, had created the opening they needed. The first step of controlled exposure was complete, and the balance of power in the family had quietly begun to shift. Emily felt a quiet satisfaction as she reviewed the reactions from the previous family gathering. Heather's influence was visibly waning, and subtle cracks in her carefully curated authority were becoming impossible to ignore. Emily knew that momentum was everything. This wasn't about winning in the moment, it was about consolidating the shift she had initiated. Allies were aligned, evidence had been presented strategically, and the narrative of truth was slowly taking hold. Every decision now required precision to maintain control while protecting Maya. She spent the morning organizing follow-up communications with Greg and their trusted relatives. Each note, message, and call was designed to reinforce what had been subtly established. No exaggeration, no emotional overreach, just facts, corroboration, and strategic framing. Emily's Navy discipline allowed her to treat the family dynamic like an operational mission. Anticipate every reaction, plan contingencies, and maintain command at every step. Maya, curious as always, asked while helping her mother sort documents. "Mom, is everything going to be okay?" Emily paused, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Yes, honey. We're making sure everyone knows the truth. You're safe, and we're making sure no one can manipulate you anymore." Maya smiled faintly, reassured by her mother's calm, controlled presence. That trust was as critical as any document or email in Emily's strategy. Later, Emily coordinated with Monica, her legal consultant. They discussed formalizing documentation, preparing for potential confrontations, and protecting Maya's rights in both legal and social contexts. "Everything needs to be airtight," Monica advised. "If Heather tries to manipulate or spin events, we have clear evidence that can't be challenged. Timing and clarity are everything." Emily nodded, appreciating the alignment of strategy, legality, and family protection. Every move was calculated to neutralize Heather's influence without creating unnecessary chaos. By afternoon, Emily prepared a carefully structured meeting with a few remaining neutral family members who had influence but had remained silent. The goal was simple: provide evidence, validate experiences, and subtly confirm that Heather's manipulations were now visible. Emily's approach was calm, almost casual, but every word and gesture was designed to reinforce credibility and support the emerging narrative of truth. Heather arrived for the meeting, her usual composure slightly strained. Emily maintained a neutral tone, greeting her with courtesy while keeping control of the room. She presented documented incidents in chronological order, including emails, photos, and corroborating notes from witnesses. Each item was factual, precise, and impossible to dispute. Heather attempted minor deflections and justifications, but Emily allowed the evidence to do the work. Allies nodded subtly, reinforcing credibility, and Heather's attempts to control the narrative began to falter visibly. Emily watched as previously neutral family members began to acknowledge the patterns. Small confirmations, subtle gestures, and quiet nods created an undeniable shift in group perception. Heather's control, reliant on secrecy and unanimous acceptance, was being quietly dismantled. Emily felt the familiar calm clarity of a mission proceeding as planned, measured, strategic, and precise. Maya observed from a nearby chair, her small hands clasped around a toy. She didn't understand every nuance, but she sensed her mother's calm authority. Emily felt a surge of protective satisfaction. This was as much about reinforcing Maya's safety and confidence as it was about exposing Heather. Every action now ensured that Heather's ability to manipulate the family further was severely restricted. Emily addressed the room carefully. "We're not here to attack anyone, only to ensure that facts are understood and that Maya's experiences are recognized. It's about clarity and fairness, nothing else." The phrasing was deliberate, neutral, respectful, but undeniable. Allies quietly validated the points, creating a controlled pressure that Heather could neither redirect nor ignore. Heather's responses became fragmented. Small inconsistencies in her stories, minor slips in tone, and defensive gestures revealed the growing tension. Emily continued calmly, documenting every reaction mentally, noting vulnerabilities for further strategic moves. This was precision at work, no yelling, no chaos, just disciplined exposure of truth combined with subtle social validation. As the meeting drew on, Emily subtly shifted attention to long-term protection. She outlined plans to secure Maya's experiences in writing, ensure documentation was available for any future disputes, and maintain allies in strategic positions. Heather tried to interrupt, but Emily's controlled presence prevented diversion. Allies reinforced the validity of the documentation, ensuring Heather's attempts at control remained ineffectual. By evening, the consolidation was clear. Heather's influence had diminished noticeably. Previously silent relatives were now quietly acknowledging the manipulation. Emily's calm, strategic approach had created a controlled shift in family power dynamics. Maya's safety and credibility were secure, and the foundation for long-term balance and protection had been established. Emily tucked Maya into bed later that night, her mind already considering further steps. The first cracks in Heather's control had been exposed, momentum had been secured, and the family narrative was now leaning toward truth. Emily's combination of maternal instinct, military discipline, and strategic foresight had turned a delicate situation into a controlled, successful operation. Looking out the window, Emily observed the snow settling silently over the city. The calm exterior of the night mirrored the quiet control she had established inside. Heather's cracks were visible, allies were aligned, and Maya's well-being was secure. Every step from this point would build upon the strategic foundation Emily had meticulously created. Control had shifted, and the balance was now in her hands. Emily's hands rested on the edge of the table, steady and deliberate. Tonight was different. Everything they had prepared, the documentation, the corroborating relatives, the subtle exposures, would culminate in a single, controlled revelation. The family had gathered again, this time for what Heather believed was a casual evening. Emily knew better. Every move had been orchestrated with precision, every ally ready, every detail accounted for. Heather's influence was fragile now, and one strategic moment could dismantle it completely. The room buzzed softly as relatives exchanged small talk. Emily observed from her seat, calm, confident, and focused. She had rehearsed every sequence in her mind, anticipating Heather's likely diversions, justifications, and attempts to manipulate the room. Greg and a few key family members sat nearby, prepared to validate any subtle disclosures and reinforce the credibility of the evidence. Emily had also arranged for discreet recording of the meeting, legal, careful, and fully documented. Emily began subtly, asking general questions about holiday memories and minor family events. Heather tried to assert control immediately, laughing, redirecting, and interjecting familiar jokes. Emily allowed it, keeping her tone neutral and light. Then, with a calm shift in voice, she said, "I've been organizing some memories from past gatherings. I thought it might help if we all had the same perspective." She opened her laptop, projecting a spreadsheet that outlined specific incidents with dates, emails, and corroborating observations. Heather froze. She masked it with a polite smile, but the tension was unmistakable. Emily continued, each statement factual and neutral, avoiding emotion but highlighting patterns. "These notes show moments where Maya was excluded or treated unfairly," Emily said softly. "I want to make sure everyone sees what happened so that no one misunderstands again." Allies subtly nodded, confirming observations without raising their voices. The impact was immediate. Relatives who had remained silent now exchanged glances, whispers of acknowledgement rippling across the room. Heather's control relied on secrecy, unanimous agreement, and subtle manipulation. Emily's careful exposure dismantled all three. Heather attempted to redirect the conversation, but each move was anticipated, and her influence faltered further with every acknowledgement of facts. Emily shifted the focus carefully to Maya. "She's seen and experienced much of this," Emily said, glancing at her daughter, who watched quietly from the side. "Her experiences deserve recognition, and it's important the family understands." Heather's composure cracked, small gestures betraying her frustration. A tightened jaw, a flicker of anger in her eyes, a nervous laugh. Emily remained calm, letting the controlled exposure speak for itself. One by one, neutral relatives quietly confirmed incidents, providing subtle but undeniable validation. Heather's narrative was unraveling under the weight of corroborated facts. Emily's strategy, combining calm authority, factual evidence, and strategic ally validation, ensured that Heather could not dominate or redirect the story. Her power, built on subtle control and fear, was visibly breaking down. Maya, small and attentive, reached for her mother's hand. "Mom, are they really listening now?" Emily smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Yes, honey. Everyone is seeing what really happened." Emily felt a rush of calm satisfaction. The careful orchestration, the patience, the precise alignment of strategy, allies, and documentation was paying off. As the room continued to process the revelations, Heather's attempts to salvage control became more obvious. but each effort only reinforced the credibility of the evidence. Her tone grew defensive, her gestures more constrained. Emily didn't need to respond. The facts, supported by witnesses, did all the work. Heather's empire of influence built over years of subtle manipulation was crumbling quietly, but decisively. Emily allowed herself to observe the scene with a detached satisfaction, noting micro-reactions, small nods, whispered affirmations, expressions of surprise, and subtle acknowledgement. Each of these small responses reinforced the shift of power in the family dynamic. Heather's retreat was inevitable. The structure she relied upon was exposed and unstable. Once the disclosures had been fully presented, Emily shifted to securing Maya's position long-term. She discussed documentation procedures, consistent ally support, and strategies to prevent future manipulation. Heather attempted minor objections, but Emily calmly redirected the conversation toward procedural clarity and protection, leaving no room for interference. By the end of the evening, Heather's authority had been dismantled publicly, allies were aligned, and Maya's experiences were validated. Emily's disciplined approach, strategic, calm, and precise, had transformed a situation previously dominated by fear and manipulation into one where truth, evidence, and careful planning dictated the outcome. After the family dispersed, Emily returned home with Maya, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle over her. Heather's influence was neutralized. The family narrative had shifted irreversibly toward transparency, and the foundation for long-term safety and stability for Maya had been established. Emily's combination of Navy discipline, maternal instinct, and methodical planning had achieved what years of subtle tension could not: clear, controlled exposure, resulting in lasting change. As she tucked Maya into bed, Emily reflected on the evening's impact. Control had shifted, evidence was undeniable, and the family dynamic was transformed. Her daughter was safe, validated, and empowered, and Emily had achieved a measured but complete resolution to the conflict Heather had fostered for years. The calm of the night settled over the city, a quiet echo of the order Emily had restored inside the family. If you've been inspired by Emily's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real family revenge stories and military-inspired journeys. Hit the bell so you never miss a story that proves truth always finds a way.